Chapter 4: Evolution and the Incredible Complexity of DNA. We begin this chapter with two distinct perspectives on the building blocks of existence. First, from tech pioneer Bill Gates, who observed, "DNA is like a computer program, but far, far more advanced than any software ever created." And second, from the legendary astrophysicist Carl Sagan, who famously reminded us, "The nitrogen in our DNA, the calcium in our teeth, the iron in our blood, the carbon in our apple pies were made in collapsing stars. We are made of star stuff." Looking back on my many years as an atheist, there was one consideration that never wavered: the issue of evolution. Evolution was not merely an academic topic for me. It was the ultimate cornerstone of my atheistic beliefs. Like a foundational pillar, it supported my entire worldview, lending weight to my understanding of life's origins and the natural processes shaping existence. My logic was simple. If we evolved, which we did, then a divine creation was entirely unnecessary. For many listeners, I suspect this resonates deeply. Evolution feels unassailable in its certainty, a steadfast framework for understanding the natural world. Now, it may surprise you to hear that my understanding and belief in the fundamentals of evolution still has not wavered. One might assume that my current belief in a creation and a creator would inevitably challenge or contradict my long-held evolutionary convictions. It seems logical to think that embracing the idea of a creator requires rejecting science, aligning instead with views often associated with rigid religious doctrines. Yet, as I emphasized at the beginning of this book, any religious interpretations you draw from this work will be entirely your own. My goal is not to present a theological argument, but rather to explore the fascinating intersections where belief in a creation meets modern scientific evidence. Still, the question persists: how can I now subscribe to both a creation and a creator while maintaining my certainty in evolution? On the surface, these concepts might seem incompatible, even mutually exclusive. For decades, the cultural and intellectual narrative has presented evolution and creation as two opposing forces in a zero-sum debate. But what if this contradiction is completely unnecessary? What if the tension between these ideas lies not in the evidence itself, but in the rigid contexts we use to interpret it? To address this, let me clarify exactly what I mean by creation and creator. I am not, of course, referring to the literalist interpretations of young Earth creationism, which outright reject evolutionary biology and insist on a strict, scriptural timeline of the natural world. Instead, my view of creation encompasses the understanding of an intentional force, an underlying intelligence or purpose, that set the stage and established the laws for the evolutionary processes we observe today. In this context, evolution and creation are not adversaries. They are complementary parts of a greater whole. This perspective came into sharp focus for me when I began to deeply consider the remarkable complexity of DNA. Deoxyribonucleic acid, pronounced deoxyribonucleic acid, the molecule of life, is one of the most intricate and awe-inspiring systems we have ever encountered. It is the literal blueprint for all living organisms, containing the instructions for building and maintaining every cell, tissue, and organ in the body. So while all life evolved, it was DNA that heralded that evolution into reality. But where did this complexity, this massive knowledge base, and this highly advanced factory-like apparatus originate? Consider the insights of Dr. James Tour, a renowned American chemist and nanotechnologist celebrated for his groundbreaking work in organic synthesis and molecular electronics. Dr. Tour notes that the sheer complexity and interdependence of cellular systems render it highly improbable that DNA, or any form of functional life, could emerge spontaneously through undirected chemical processes. He has spoken extensively about the massive hurdles in explaining a purely naturalistic origin of life. His core argument highlights that DNA is not just a random sequence of chemicals, it is a highly ordered, precise structure, requiring incredibly specific conditions for its formation. In a laboratory, when scientists try to replicate or synthesize these life-bearing molecules, they rely on strictly controlled conditions, highly skilled intervention, and purified chemicals. These sterile, deliberate conditions simply would not exist on a chaotic, prebiotic Earth. Dr. Tor critiques the field of prebiotic chemistry for failing to demonstrate any plausible pathways to create complex molecules like DNA in a natural, unguided environment. He highlights an enormous scientific gap, the vast difference between producing simple molecules, like amino acids, and actually assembling them into functional information-carrying polymers, like DNA. You see, DNA serves as an information storage system. This raises a profound philosophical and scientific question. How is it possible for information, which is inherently abstract and immaterial, to arise from purely material, unguided processes? The sequencing of the nucleotides in DNA must be exact to encode functional proteins, meaning random chemical bumps in the night are mathematically unlikely to generate meaningful sequences. Furthermore, DNA requires existing enzymes and proteins to replicate and function, yet those very enzymes and proteins are themselves encoded by DNA. This creates a classic chicken and egg dependency loop that challenges the idea of DNA arising independently. The interdependence of these cellular components suggests that the entire system needed to appear simultaneously, posing an immense challenge to purely naturalistic mechanisms. As Dr. Tor has repeatedly summarized, we have no idea how the molecules needed for life could have formed, let alone assembled into functional systems. This underscores the staggering mathematical improbability of assembling even a single functional DNA molecule through random processes. The number of possible junk sequences vastly outnumbers those that are biologically viable. The sheer amount of information encoded within the DNA of even the simplest organism is mind-boggling. For instance, the human genome consists of approximately 3.2 billion base pairs, an immense dataset that orchestrates the development of a human being with breathtaking precision. What is even more remarkable is the language-like structure of DNA. It operates using a four-letter chemical code: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, represented by the letters A, T, C, and G. This code functions exactly like a highly sophisticated programming language, directing the synthesis of proteins, which are the workhorses of cellular life. The fidelity of DNA replication and its built-in capacity to repair its own errors highlight an astonishing level of precision. Yet DNA is also brilliantly flexible, capable of the minor mutations and recombinations that drive the diversity and adaptability central to evolution. As an atheist, I used to marvel at the elegance of this system, viewing it as the ultimate testament to natural selection's power to shape complexity from simplicity. But years ago, I found myself asking a tough question. Did I view DNA and evolution this way because the evidence actually demanded it? Or was I simply repeating the superficial science and biases reinforced by popular atheist thinkers? Today, looking objectively at the evidence, I see that DNA is far too complex to have organized itself on its own. The intricate coding and the molecular machinery that translates it cannot simply be the byproduct of undirected processes. This complexity itself acts as an intentional design, a kind of divine signature woven into the very fabric of life. To truly appreciate why the origin of DNA strains naturalism, we must look at the grand cosmic stage upon which it arrived. The biological code of life did not appear in a vacuum. It is the culmination of a cosmic narrative that began with the Big Bang. If we trace the lineage of a single carbon or phosphorus atom inside a DNA molecule, we find its origin story written in the primordial fires of the early universe and the intense gravitational furnaces of collapsing stars. As Carl Sagan noted, The laws of physics beautifully explain how an exploding supernova scatters these raw elements across the dark expanse of space. Yet those same physical laws are utterly silent when asked how those scattered atoms eventually arranged themselves into a self-correcting, digital operating system. There is a profound, seemingly insurmountable gulf between forging raw matter and organizing that matter into a functional linguistic script. What we must confront here is that the layout of DNA is not a problem of chemistry, it is a problem of information. Consider a computer program. The software can be saved onto a physical hard drive, but the metal and plastic of the drive did not create the code. The arrangement of data is an expression of mind, completely independent of the material hosting it. If you walk along a beach and see a sentence written in the sand, you know the message did not originate from the chemical properties of the silicon grains. It came from an external intelligence. In DNA, the chemical bases, A, T, C, and G, are merely the physical ink and paper. The instructions they spell out are abstract, immaterial data. To claim that the laws of unguided chemistry generated the digital library of the genome is to mistake the physical properties of the ink for the mind of the author. Ironically, when pushed past the glossy summaries found in popular textbooks, the world's leading evolutionary biologists and secular prebiotic chemists will readily admit that they are utterly in the dark regarding the origin of the first self-replicating strands of DNA. They will fiercely reject the idea of an intelligent creator, yet in the same breath, they must concede that science currently possesses no viable, step-by-step naturalistic mechanism to explain how digital code emerged from a primordial soup. They operate on a foundational assumption that a material explanation must exist, but as a matter of raw empirical fact, they are forced to confess an absolute, collective ignorance as to how it actually happened. To understand this better, we must look beyond biological evolution to the origins of the universe itself. Evolution, after all, is not an isolated phenomenon. It exists within a larger framework that began roughly 13.8 billion years ago with the Big Bang. The singularity prior to the Big Bang is an enigmatic concept. It represents a point where all known laws of physics break down, a realm of infinite density and temperature. Yet within this singularity lay the potential for everything: the laws of nature, the fundamental forces, and the particles that would eventually form stars, galaxies, and life. It is, in many ways, the ultimate seed of creation. As the universe expanded, this initial simplicity gave way to increasing complexity. Subatomic particles coalesced into atoms, atoms gathered into stars, stars forged heavier elements through nuclear fusion and scattered them across the cosmos via supernova. Over billions of years, the universe transitioned from a chaotic, primordial state to one of astonishing order. This progression mirrors, on a cosmic scale, the process of evolution itself, a constant movement from simplicity to complexity. What set this process in motion? Was the universe's incredible potential an accident, a fortuitous result of absolute randomness? Or could it reflect the fingerprints of a creator, a deliberate act that finely tuned the constants of nature to allow life to emerge? For me, the answer to this question deepens the wonder of existence. Evolution is often viewed as a purely biological process, but its roots extend to the very beginning of time. The elements that form DNA were forged in the hearts of stars billions of years before the first cell appeared. The processes that govern natural selection, adaptation, and biodiversity are built entirely upon the physical laws established in the immediate aftermath of the Big Bang. In this sense, evolution is not an isolated mechanism. It is a magnificent chapter in the story of a universe that began with a burst of energy and has since unfolded into galaxies, ecosystems, and sentient beings capable of pondering their own origins. Evolution should be seen as the creator's tool, the mechanism through which the universe's inherent potential for life is realized over time. When it comes to the reality of evolution, we do not have to debate whether it is a fact. Based on the science, we and all living matter did evolve to be what we are today. Evolution, especially of life on Earth, is as clear as the summer sun. But a reductionist scientific perspective often focuses only on the fundamental components, missing the deeper how and why. For life to evolve, it requires genetic variation, driven by mutations, gene flow between populations, and the pressures of natural and sexual selection. But all of these mechanisms require an existing, functioning genetic system to operate. This brings us back to the core mystery. Where did DNA itself come from? DNA is more than just a chemical structure. It is a highly advanced code complete with redundancy, parallel processing capability, and error-correcting algorithms. It operates much like the schematic designs of a sophisticated factory, meticulously orchestrating the processes that sustain life. Despite decades of research, the origin of this intricate information remains one of the most profound enigmas in science. Even the famous philosopher Antony Flew, who was a staunch defender of atheism for decades, cited the incredible complexity and apparent design of DNA as the primary reason he eventually came to believe in a creator. Furthermore, while evolutionary theory explains how biological diversity flourishes, it struggles to address major macroevolutionary events, such as the initial emergence of entirely new body plans, the origin of life itself, or the staggering functional gulf between the modern human brain and those of other hominids. The biochemical and genetic factors behind advanced human cognition remain largely unexplained by current models. The step-by-step mechanisms by which DNA is read and executed mirror the algorithmic functions of computer systems. During replication, proofreading enzymes check for errors, while regulatory elements act like factory management systems, turning genes on and off to adapt to changing environments. Dr. Stephen Meyer, a prominent philosopher of science and advocate for intelligent design, argues that this specified, algorithmic information is best explained by an intelligent cause rather than undirected natural processes. In information theory, after all, we observe that high-level codes and languages invariably originate from a mind. Random processes have never been observed to generate coherent, functional digital code. The appearance of design is so compelling that even staunchly atheistic scientists acknowledge it. Richard Dawkins famously described biology as the study of complicated things that give the appearance of having been designed for a purpose. In his book, The Blind Watchmaker, Dawkins made a striking observation, noting that while physics books describe relatively simple phenomena, a single cell in the body of an author is infinitely more complex, containing a digitally coded database larger in information content than all 30 volumes of the Encyclopaedia Britannica put together. Consider the sheer efficiency of this design. James Watson and Francis Crick discovered the double helix structure in 1953, and we now know that a single gram of DNA can theoretically store 215 petabytes of data, far beyond the capacity of any artificial storage device created by humans. Moreover, the processes of life exhibit what is called irreducible complexity. The process of turning DNA into RNA and RNA into functional proteins relies on a vast, interdependent network of molecules. The DNA cannot function without the proteins, but the proteins cannot be built without the DNA. This simultaneous interdependence creates an insurmountable barrier for a piecemeal, unguided evolutionary start. Many scientists, including prominent figures like Dr. Francis Collins, the former director of the Human Genome Project, see absolutely no contradiction between the science of evolution and a belief in God. Collins beautifully describes evolution as the literal tool used by the Creator to speak the diversity of life into existence. We must carefully distinguish between the origin of life and the evolution of life. Darwinian evolution relies on reproduction mutation, and selection. Because there was no reproduction before the first living cell existed, natural selection could not have operated to build the initial complexity. The first life had to arise solely from the raw laws of physics and chemistry, and it is precisely here that naturalistic theories break down. Reflecting on my formative years as an atheist, I see now how my earlier, superficial interpretations of science led me to a simplistic and incomplete conclusion. The false idea that the fact of evolution automatically precluded the possibility of a creator. I now recognize that notion as deeply flawed. Evolution does not negate a creator. Rather, its elegant mechanisms, underpinned by the digital marvel of DNA, point directly to an underlying design, a grand harmony and profound intent woven into the very fabric of life.